All right, we're going to do a movie called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. It was executive produced by Stephen King, so you know it's about to be some shit. So we got this guy by the name of Craig, he's a little boy. Now he lives with his dad, just his dad, because his mom passed away. And he kind of feels like he's the reason for his mom dying. But why though? So anyway, Craig and his dad are going to church, and they notice this guy there staring at him. Now this is taking place in a town called Harlow. This is like back in 2003. Basically a little small town. So anyway, the guy that was staring at them in the church, this guy goes by the name of John Harrigan. Turns out this guy's actually a billionaire. Now, why would a billionaire be living in a small town? I'll tell you eventually. So of all the people he could have picked, he picked Craig to come work with him. Now, what is Craig about to get paid $5 an hour for? Simply put, to just read him books. Books that he's collected over the years. Now, every now and then, the maid will get him to do like some mediocre chores, but bottom line is he's there for the sole purpose of reading them books. And it was at a point where Craig actually enjoyed reading to him. So he would tell him about the world. He's pretty much old-fashioned, you know what I'm saying? The only things he reads by himself is like newspapers. He'll look at like the stock exchange or financial stuff. And they were able to connect on some type of level. And every now and then he would also give him these old like scratch-off tickets that had like devil markings on them and whatnot. But these scratch-off, he wouldn't win nothing on it. He might win like $1 or $2 or something like that. We find out when he look in his desk drawer, he's got a bunch of these scratch-offs that he's never even touched. So it gets to a point where it's like 5 years later, he's still reading to Mr. Harrigan. One day, Craig was checking in the house to see if anybody was home, and then he sees his closet. He was about to go in the closet, but then Mr. Harrigan pops up. He's like, look, man, don't go in there. There's terrible secrets in there. What terrible secrets? So he abides by his wishes. He didn't go in there. So now Craig's all grown up. He's ready to go to high school. He gets to his high school. He's got a couple of friends trying to show him around and stuff like that. And all these people are supposedly high tech because they got iPhones and smartphones and whatnot. Keep in mind, Craig and these other 3 people that he's with don't have phones. Because apparently their town is so small they can just get in contact with each other within like seconds. So they never really had a use for phones. And of course, Craig ends up getting a bully in his first date. This dude by the name of Kenny. Kenny's this big goofy looking motherfucker with like this black trench coat. He's like picking on him at first. He asks him to take something out of this bag. It's like some type of paraphernalia and whatnot. Then his teacher by the name of Miss Hart comes up. He was like, hey, Kenny, you starting any shit? And then Craig covers for him. He's like, yo, he asks him what's in the bag. He's like, oh, it's just a sandwich, but I wasn't really hungry like that. After Miss Hart leaves, Kenny's like, yeah, you're still dead. He was like, nigga, I just saved your ass. The fuck is you talking about? Nah, forget all that. So there you go. That's his one bully at the school. So he goes back to Mr. Harrigan's house, does his daily reading, gets himself a check, gives him a scratch off. Except this time when he goes back home to his house, he scratches off the scratch off and actually wins $3,000. So his father tells him to put most of it away, for college and stuff like that. But Craig wants to use a portion of it for a very special reason. So around Christmas time, Dad ends up getting Craig a phone. So now he's got an iPhone and whatnot. Now he can be with the cool kids. So what does Craig do with this portion of the money? He ends up getting Mr. Harrigan an iPhone. Now, Mr. Harrigan don't want to deal with this newfangled technology. But Craig is like, no, look, there's a faster way to get to like the stock markets and financial stuff. Everything is in real time. So that was his selling pitch, and John Harrigan accepted the phone. So then they put each other's information in the phones and whatnot. And then he starts talking to them about phones of the devil. Why? Because he feels like the internet is giving out free information. And then before you know it, they're going to give out false information, putting stuff on social media, whatever like that. Basically telling the future. Then he gives them this speech about, you know what's worth more than money? Power. And information is a large part of power. Now that phrase is funny coming from a billionaire telling you this, but he's an old-fashioned kind of guy. He's a guy that doesn't even have a TV in his house. Because if he had a TV in his house, he would be wasting a lot of time watching it. Yeah, he's like this old-fashioned type of guy. Like, even the house that he has doesn't look like somebody that would have a billionaire type of house. I mean, it kind of looks like a mansion, but it looks decent at best. But basically, his whole reason for living out there in a small town anyways, because he just hates being around people at this point. He feels like everybody's too advanced for their own good, but he loves talking to Craig, so there you go. So one day he goes by his house and he sees his oxygen tank over on the side. He's like, huh, that's new. So right after that, you can tell his health is starting to fade a little bit, right? So every now and then, John Harrigan talks to this dude by the name of Chick Farley. He was like an advisor or something like that. I'll explain his situation in a minute. So Craig tells him what he wants to do after high school. He wants to be like a screenwriter. He wants to go to like Los Angeles and stuff. And then Mr. Harrigan's like, huh, that's the devil's playground when it comes to stuff. Obviously, a guy that doesn't like the technology would detest a place like Los Angeles, right? So he tells Craig, promise me if anything happens, if you have enemies, you'll dispatch them and all this other shit. I'm like, he's like, you got to have that sharp mind for business and stuff like that. I'm thinking to myself, is he talking about offing niggas or just like sliding off the competition? Like, what? So Craig promises him, yes, he'll do whatever he needs to do. So Craig goes back to school. He has this girl that he's talking to or texting because both of them got iPhones. They're like feeling each other or whatever. The guy, Kenny, is still picking on him and whatnot. Now, there's a situation where he's leaving school and Kenny's outside in the other corner selling drugs to this kid. In between all that, Kenny ends up getting expelled from school, but because he saw Craig look at him, he assumed that he snitched on him. But thinking back to my first encounter with him, why would he snitch on you if he tried to cover up for you the first time when Miss Hart pulled up on you? You know what I'm saying? Like, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So then Tuesday rolls around, he's going to his daily meet with like Mr. Harrigan. And Mr. Harrigan is just sitting in the chair asleep with this oxygen tube on his nose. Or at least we thought he was asleep because then he checked his pulse. This nigga was dead. I'm like,
What?
Yeah, so basically it's John's done deal. So they waited till the ambulance came and stuff like that, and then afterwards Craig went home. But Craig also took Mr. Harrigan's phone. Now, what reason did he have to do this? Well, basically, when it comes time for the funeral, everybody's saying their goodbyes, and then Craig says his goodbye last. And he actually puts the phone in his jacket pocket so he could be buried with it. So afterwards, a couple of days passes, he ends up going to this like dance or prom or something like that they're having at the school. And he's going with the iPhone girl that he likes. So he escorts her to the bathroom. While she's in the bathroom, all of a sudden, Kenny pops out of nowhere, drags him outside, and starts whipping his ass. Because like I said earlier, he thinks Craig snitched on him for getting himself expelled. Craig got one good shot in, but bottom line is he got duffed. And then his girlfriend came back out to chase Kenny away. So basically get this scene where Miss Hart is patching up Craig, making sure he's all good and everything. And in the middle of that conversation, Craig says, yeah, you smell nice. She's like, yeah, I use soap. But really, it's just this Bombay type of soap that she has that's very rare in this part of the world. Now, why is that tidbit important? I'll tell you that later on. So Craig ends up going back home. He picks up his phone and tries to call Mr. Harrigan. Now, we all know he's dead, but the thing is, you know what I'm saying, he talks to himself. He doesn't really have a whole lot of friends. So he starts telling them things about this dude, Kenny. And he's like, yeah, I fought back, but, I wish I could have did more. And he's just having these conversations like anybody's going to respond, right? Then all of a sudden he gets a text message that says CCC on it. You're like, the fuck? From Mr. Harrigan? How? He's flipping out at first, but then he doesn't think about it. So now it's actually time for the proper burial to bury Mr. Harrigan into the ground. This guy ends up approaching him at the funeral. Turns out it's the dude Chick Farley, the guy that Mr. Harrigan's always talking to. He's like an actual advisor, and then he ends up giving Craig this letter. Turns out this letter is actually part of a will. John Harrigan's been working with Chick for the past, couple of months before leading up to this, and he made sure Craig inherited $800,000. Now, in the letter, he says you can use it for whatever purposes or whatever like that, but this will be a good head start if you're going to use it for, screenwriting and production if you're going to be in Los Angeles. Man, that shit is nuts. So the crazy thing after all this, he ends up going back to the house, and as he's chilling thinking about his life decisions, he gets another text message, and he swears it's from Mr. Harrigan, my bad. So Craig starts freaking out to his dad. He's thinking to himself, like, they buried him alive, yo. He's still alive, you know what I'm saying? We need to dig him up, all this other stuff. Now, dad's thinking to himself, somebody probably hacked the phone or something like that. But then he tries to put his suspicions to rest. So he tells him the reason that John died is he actually had some type of heart attack. And the coroner's office and stuff like that actually cut open his heart to see how it went down. So there's no way he could still be alive. He didn't want to tell him because he didn't want to traumatize him and stuff like that. But bottom line is, that's what happened. All right, so remember when Craig was supposedly having a conversation with Mr. Harrigan talking about Kenny? So a couple of days after that, one of his friends calls him from school, tells him about he has some bad news. And we find out Kenny passed away. We're like, what? It happened in front of his house. His parents and people was crying and all this stuff. But they chalk up his death as to being a terrible accident. Now, he's back in school with his teacher, Miss Hart, and after everybody leaves the classroom, they have a conversation. And she notices that Craig has been off, obviously, because of the whole Kenny situation. She tells him, like, look, Kenny was a troubled dude. Psychologically, mentally, emotionally, it was damaging the house, it's damaging everything, like, you know what I'm saying? So out of nowhere, Craig asks Miss Hart, like, do you believe in ghosts? She's like, I believe they might exist, but I'm not going to pick up no Ouija boards and no shit like that to try to call on them. So later on, Craig goes back to Mr. Harrigan's house, right? But he wants to talk to the maid there, this chick by the name of Irma. She really wants to give him a souvenir or whatnot. Then he sees something there. Apparently, it belonged to this dude by the name of Dusty. Now, who the heck is Dusty? So apparently, Dusty was somebody that worked for Mr. Flanagan a while ago. Mr. Harrigan, my bad. He was like a gardener or whatever, but the thing was, he ended up catching him stealing or whatever at one point in time. So Mr. Harrigan fired him. He basically ended up living out of this trailer home, but Irma says she don't know what happened to him after that. So then Craig did his investigation work. He ends up finding out where Dusty's trailer is, but he's not there. But this other old lady is talking to him about it. Turns out Dusty ran his truck into some type of garage after the incident happened. We don't know how he died. Apparently he did. So Craig starts looking inside of the truck. There's like a bunch of junk, but he does see one of the lottery tickets in there. So what really happened to Dusty? I don't know. So at this point, Craig wants to leave all this shit behind. He ends up going to the store, getting a new phone. He puts his other phone in a box in a closet somewhere. A closet in his room. And around this point, he gets a letter in the mail. He ends up going to school. But the thing is, he's not going to LA. He's going to end up going to Boston. So he's ready to go to Boston, leave all this stuff behind. He's doing his journalism stuff. He's writing screenplays, doing all types of fancy work. So some time rolls by. He's about ready to come back home for a little bit, but his father's got some bad news to tell him. He tells him that his teacher, Miss Hart, passed away. We're like, what the fuck? All right, so here's the situation. While Craig was away, Miss Hart ended up getting a fiance, and they were about to go visit this little cabin in the countryside. While they were driving, some other dude came out of nowhere. This guy by the name of Dean Wolford. He was drunk driving, and he ended up crashing head on into him and her fiance. Now, what was the result of that? Miss Hart died, the fiance's in the hospital, and Dean, with no driver's license and four priors, was still able to get off. Apparently, he's got money. They put him in a rehab country club for like 6 months. So basically, no justice served, right? So apparently, Craig goes back to the house. He ends up pulling out the old phone that he had in the closet. But obviously, he had to charge the battery up first. And once the battery was charged, he calls on the phone and dials up Mr. Flanagan's old number. Now, once again, you think to yourself, he's just talking to himself. But considering what happened, he wants Dean dead. And he tells that to him over the phone. So even Craig at this point believes this is crazy. Why the fuck am I telling a dead guy to try to kill somebody? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So at this point, Craig is feeling like he needs some help, so he goes to the neighborhood priest, and then he asks him what really happened in the Kenny situation. Turns out Kenny was supposedly high as hell. He was on like a 2-story roof. He climbs on the top of the roof, but he slips off of the roof, fell to the ground, and broke his neck, which is what they called the tragic accident. But then you think to yourself, what the fuck was he doing on the roof? So apparently that's what really happened to Kenny and how he died. So Craig has his suspicions, but he still feels like it's bullshit. But then 2 days later, also we find out Dean Whitworth ended up dying. Now, how did he die? So he goes over to the country club that he was staying at, talked to some dude on the side of the building, and then he asked him about Dean and some information on how he died. He's like, you had to cough up like $200. So he meets him over at this hole-in-the-wall Harry O's club and shit. He pulls up in a red car. Craig gets in and gives him the money. He says it turns out this guy choked to death in the shower. Now, how did that happen? Now, people were saying that he slipped on some soap and then broke his neck in the shower, but the other part was saying half a bar of soap was in his mouth and he was choking on it like he was trying to eat it or something. It just so happened the kind of soap he had was some Bombay soap. Remember when Craig back in the day asked Miss Hart about what kind of soap she used, and she was using a Bombay type of soap? Now, if this guy got off on a drunk driving murder charge with no license and 4 different priors, you're thinking to yourself, okay, apparently he's got money like that. Why would he just have to have some rare type of soap? The same type of soap the person that he killed uses. Very fucking coincidental, right? So at this point, Craig gets in his own car. He starts freaking out because he's thinking to himself, like, I'm causing this shit. And considering he's thinking to himself, he thinks it's his fault that his mother died. And he's thinking now he has the power to control Mr. Harrigan to be able to kill off people that needs to be done. Yeah, obviously that's going to psychologically mess this guy up. So it gets to a point where he goes to Mr. Harrigan's grave, and he thinks the CCCST messages stand for like Craig stop. And he thinks it's killing him inside for him to be able to ask him to do these type of deeds. But it could be all going on in his head. You never know. Then he goes over to his mom's grave after he apologizes to Mr. Harrigan. Now, he hasn't visited his mom's grave since he died, which was like 8 years ago. There, he starts apologizing to her too. Then he just takes off and starts running. He runs over to this lake and then tosses the old phone in the lake. And then he has his other phone that he has. He decides to keep that one. And then he just walks away, and that's the end of the movie. So now I'm thinking to myself, was he really able to contact the spirit of Mr. Harrigan? Was he actually carrying out these deeds based off a phone call? What was really taking place with all these coincidental deaths? Mystery beyond mysteries. Mr. Harrigan's phone on Netflix. Check it out. And now you know why it's called that. There you go.